President Bobby Joseph, the other distinguished officers, and members of this great Rotary Club of Manila, good afternoon. It is good to once again see familiar faces, virtually at least. I am certain that moving from physical meetings and events to the digital realm is something that is new to all of us. Nevertheless, I find comfort in knowing that this pandemic could not shake the dedication of a Rotarian spirit in living up to its overarching motto, service above self. Your invitation says I have 30 minutes to speak. Since there are many points to cover in our virtual discussion today, I will cut to the chase and go straight to the issue, or I would say issues at hand. For the past couple of weeks, among the trending topics that have been dominating the mainstream and social media platforms is the Anti-Terrorism Bill, which, as we speak, is awaiting the signature of the President. Unfortunately, the ongoing campaign against this proposed measure, heavily influenced by massive misinformation and disinformation, unfairly devalues the importance of this legislative measure on many fronts. Hence, as the principal sponsor and one of the authors of the bill, it is incumbent upon me to take every available platform to shed light on the legislative intent and merit of the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020 as proposed. As a Rotarian myself, I believe that nothing could better validate the ideals and virtue of the proposed Anti-Terrorism Bill or Act than subjecting it to Rotary's guiding principles and moral code of the Rotary's four-way test, which every Rotarian knows by heart. Allow me to begin with probably the most controversial provision under the Anti-Terrorism Bill, which is now being challenged as unconstitutional by former Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio, as well as IBP President Domingo Egon Cayosa. Both of them are asserting that Section 29 of the bill gives the Anti-Terrorism Council the power to order the arrest without judicial warrant of a suspected terrorist. Now, you may ask, is it the truth? My answer is a resounding no. Let me tell you why. To be clear, the written authority issued by the Anti-Terrorism Council under Section 29 of the proposed bill is to be directed to its duly designated deputies, such as law enforcement agents and military personnel specially tasked and trained to handle the custodial investigation involving violations of the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020 as proposed, considering the complexities and nature of terrorism. Not all police officers are trained interrogators and investigators, especially involving a crime as complex and complicated as an act of terrorism. These specially tasked or trained law enforcement officers and military personnel shall need a written authority to be deputized by the Anti-Terrorism Council to perform such tasks. The term custody in Section 29 of the Anti-Terrorism Bill pertains to the lawful custody after a valid warrantless arrest pursuant to Section 5, Rule 113 of the revised Rules of Court. It is only after a valid warrantless arrest that the law enforcement agent or military personnel authorized in writing by the ATC may conduct a custodial investigation. Section 29 does not amend the rules on warrantless arrest. Section 29 seeks to amend the reglementary periods stated in Article 125 of the revised Penal Code with regard to the crime of terrorism. To clarify this issue, I even wrote to IBP President Attorney Cayosa to correct his misconceptions on the authority of the Anti-Terrorism Council. In his letter reply, he said that, and I quote, Section 29 could not refer to allowable warrantless arrest under Rule 113 because anyone can actually effect a warrantless arrest under Rule 113 without any need for any written authority from anyone. Make no mistake, I am saying exactly the same thing. While it is true that anyone can effect a warrantless arrest, I was trying to make him understand that not everybody is trained to properly conduct a custodial investigation, particularly of a crime as complex as terrorism. Attorney Cayosa, however, remains adamant in his own interpretation of Section 29 of the Anti-Terrorism Bill, notwithstanding receipt of my letter addressing his concerns. To belabor this point, as I must, the Anti-Terrorism Bill strictly complies with lawful warrantless arrest by virtue of the in flagrante delito and hot pursuit rule under the revised rules of court. In both cases, the arrests are immediate in nature. That said, it is illogical, inconsistent, and even absurd to think that the Anti-Terrorism Council will issue a written authorization to an arresting officer before effecting the warrantless arrest, granting the immediacy and spontaneousness of the circumstances leading to the arrest. In fact, when we asked Director General Alex Monteagudo of the National Intelligence Coordinating Agency, or NICA, which is the secretariat of the ATC, he said, and I quote, that never since the passage of the Human Security Act in 2007 has the agency released a written authority to law enforcers to arrest or detain suspected terrorists. Isn't that enough proof that the written authority mentioned in Section 18 of the Human Security Act of 2007, as similarly written in Section 29 of the Anti-Terrorism Bill, is never intended to authorize the ATC to order an arrest? The truth is, records of the Senate archives tell us that the phrase having been duly authorized in writing by the Anti-Terrorism Council was originally an amendment introduced by an acknowledged legal eagle and an unquestionably experienced legislator in the person of Senator Franklin Drilon in the Human Security Act of 2007, accepted by another giant in the legal profession, then sponsor of the Human Security Act of 2007, former Senator Juan Ponce Enrile. This phrase, which has been the subject of recent debates, is merely being retained in the proposed Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020. Mind you, the same phrase contained in Section 18 entitled Period of Detention Without Judicial Warrant of Arrest of the Human Security Act of 2007, and which has the same language of Section 29 of the Anti-Terrorism Bill entitled Detention Without Judicial Warrant of Arrest, was voted favorably by a number of distinguished legal experts and luminaries, both in the Senate and the House of Representatives. Justice Carpio has declared in a webinar organized by the Management Association of the Philippines that Section 18 of the Human Security Act, similarly worded as Section 29 of the Anti-Terrorism Bill, was never declared constitutional by the Supreme Court. If such a statement does not have the trimmings of malicious intent to achieve a purpose known only to its author, it may be assumed that Justice Carpio overlooked existing jurisprudence on the presumption of constitutionality. Let me explain. No less than the Supreme Court ruled on the matter of presumption of constitutionality in Tano versus Socrates, GR number 110249, dated August 21, 1997, to wit. It is, of course, settled that laws, including ordinances enacted by local government units, enjoy the presumption of constitutionality. To overthrow this presumption, there must be a clear and unequivocal breach of the Constitution, not merely a doubtful or argumentative contradiction. In short, the conflict with the Constitution must be shown beyond reasonable doubt. Where doubt exists, even if well-founded, there can be no finding of unconstitutionality. To doubt is to sustain. That is the Supreme Court talking about presumption of constitutionality. Still, for the life of me, I cannot understand why a former senior magistrate of the Supreme Court would disregard such basic and significant jurisprudence. In any case, to allay any fears, Section 29 ensures safeguards to avoid abuses by requiring a written notification to be immediately given to the judge of the court nearest the place of arrest. Copy furnished the Anti-Terrorism Council. We have also included in the proposal for the same notification to be provided to the Commission on Human Rights, a requirement not even present under the Human Security Act of 2007. I can only assume that perhaps some, if not most of you, have expressed concerns pertinent to the false assertions of the likes of Justice Carpio and Attorney Cayosa that a person may be arrested or detained on mere suspicion alone. Again, you may ask, is it the truth? Again, my response is no. The legislative intent of the bill is clearly to premise Section 29 on a valid warrantless arrest, or what we also refer to as a citizen's arrest, as also lawfully allowed in other crimes that are not related to terrorism. The provision is compliant with Rule 113, Section 5 of the Revised Rules of Court. Under the proposed anti-terrorism law, a warrantless arrest is allowed under the same circumstances as in any other crime, by virtue of 1, in flagrante delito arrest, or when the person to be arrested has committed, is actually committing, or is attempting to commit terrorism, and 2, in a hot pursuit arrest. It was never the intention of Congress to amend the rules on warrantless arrest. Oppositions to this proposed measure went the extra mile by citing my statement during a Senate deliberation. Unfortunately, their extra mile was headed in the wrong direction at top speed. For instance, Justice Carpio quoted me by saying, in the exact words of the principal author of the law, even if hindi naman siya nag-commit ng crime, hindi pa nangyari, pwede na natin arestuhin. Taking his word for it unjustly resulted in undue public fear and hysteria. Hence, let me be clear. The statement in question was in reference to acts preparatory to the commission of terrorism. In my response to Senator Gordon, I made it understandable that we never intended to amend the rules on warrantless arrest or citizens' arrest, and hence safeguards are still in place. During the roundtable discussions that we had for this measure, among the key recommendations from the representatives of the Australian Embassy was the need to adopt proactive measures that will prevent even the planning phase of the crime. Thus, I explained that under the proposal, we included the proposition to penalize inchoate offenses or preparatory acts that are deemed criminal even without the actual harm being done, provided that the harm that would have occurred is one the law tries to prevent, such as terrorism. Preparatory acts, as a rule, are not punishable unless, I repeat, unless Congress, as collegial body, includes in the law a provision to make preparatory acts punishable as independent crimes. By way of example, the revised penal code defines and penalizes conspiracy and proposal to commit rebellion, treason, insurrection, and coup d'etat. We added planning, training, preparing, and facilitating the commission of terrorism under Section 6 as inchoate offenses punishable under the bill, because these acts are being performed towards the accomplishment of the desired purpose, that is terrorism. No less than the United Nations Security Council, in UNSC Resolution number 1373, among others, or declares that planning and preparation, among others, are established as serious criminal offenses in domestic laws, and that the punishment should duly reflect the seriousness of such terrorist acts. Let me cite a likely scenario. Kung makakita ang ating mga kapulisan o tropa ng militar habang nagpapatrolya sa isang liblatan ng basilan ng mga nagtitipon-tipon at nagsasagawa ng pagpaplano ng sabay-sabay na pagpapasabog ng iba't ibang pasilidad ng irigasyon at tore ng linya ng kuryente, pati ang ilang simbahang katoliko at mga palengke, kumpleto ng kanilang sketches sa mapa kung saan ang mga lokasyon ng targets nila, kasama na ang improvised suicide vests at detonating devices. Gusto ba nating mangyari na hintayin muna ng otoridad na may mangyaring aktwal na pagsabog at pagkitil ng buhay ng maraming inosenteng sibilyan bago nila isagawa ang panguhuli sa mga taong halos ay nasa harapan na nila? Hindi pa ba may tuturing na krimen ang ganong gawain kahit hindi pa nagaganap ang malawakang pagpapasabog? Yan po ay isa lamang halimbawa ng inchoate offense na hinahangad na maparusahan sa ilalim ng panukalang Anti-Terrorism Bill. Kayo na po ang humusga. Another wrongful assumption about the Anti-Terrorism Council is its alleged authority to detain suspected terrorists and to fix the period of detention to 14 days, extendable to another 10 days. I strongly and insistently refute this. Again, the Anti-Terrorism Council has no authority to detain suspected terrorists. Ang mga nasabing probisyon ay policy decision ng Kongreso na naaayon sa ating saligang batas. First, we can find the allowable periods of detention in Article 125 of the Revised Penal Code. Let me emphasize that the Revised Penal Code is a general law which Congress can amend. That said, the 14-day period of detention under the proposed Anti-Terrorism Bill, being a later law, once signed, will be treated as an amendment to the allowable periods stated in the Revised Penal Code. Looking back at the deliberations of the Constitutional Commission in 1986, records would show that the Constitutional Commission delegates did not have any intention of restricting the powers of Congress to fix the allowable period of detention arising from an arrest. Clearly, the 3-day limitation was incorporated in the provisions of Article 7, Section 18 of the Constitution as a safeguard in case the President, in the exercise of his powers, suspends the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus. Article 125 of the Revised Penal Code, on the other hand, mandates the law enforcer to deliver an arrested person to the proper judicial authorities through the inquest prosecutor within the allowable periods of detention. Moving on, as we test the proposed measure through the Rotary's overarching dictum, let us try to resolve the question, is it fair to all concerned? Let me be clear that we urge public discourse on all social and political policy decisions, particularly on a matter as important as the Anti-Terrorism Bill. We encourage openness and civil engagement for conflict resolution. But I dare ask you, when misinformation and disinformation erode the fundamentals of our debates, do we trust that fairness will gain ground? Do our public discourses widely marred by fake news and misconceptions remain fair in appreciating the merits and intent of the law? Does it remain fair to all concerned, more importantly, to the greater Filipino masses? As an example, oppositors are calling the bill a draconian measure because of the alleged coercive powers granted to the Anti-Terrorism Council. I would like to correct the mistaken notion that the Anti-Terrorism Council is a new feature under the Anti-Terrorism Bill. Let me emphasize that the Anti-Terrorism Council is a creation of the Human Security Act in 2007 as a central policy-making, supervising, coordinating, and monitoring body of the government's anti-terrorism efforts. Under the proposed bill, the Anti-Terrorism Council will function as it does since its creation. To say the least, the Anti-Terrorism Council is not given any judicial or quasi-judicial authority, contrary to the widely disseminated fake news. To be fair, under this proposed measure, the police and military will be held accountable in the implementation of the law. In fact, the bill provides that the penalty of 10 years will be imposed on any law enforcement agent or military personnel who will violate the rights of a detainee, together with an administrative charge that carries a penalty of dismissal from the service, cancellation of civil service eligibility, forfeiture of retirement benefits, and perpetual absolute disqualification from running for any elective office or holding any public office, as expressed in the proposed Anti-Terrorism Bill. The Rotarian Moral Code also demands that in times of doubt, we ask, will it build goodwill and better friendship? A key to Rotarians' unique approach to addressing conflicts is fellowship, the process of building relationships and openness to resolve a point of conflict. As legislators, we adhere to the principle of fellowship by forging international understanding and peace among our community of nations. This includes harmonizing our laws with global standards against terrorism. Our present anti-terrorism law, or the Human Security Act, restricts us from doing so. I ask you, do we build better friendships with other nations by harboring terrorists within our borders? Do we build goodwill by consciously allowing our lands to be the safe haven of terrorism? Lest we forget, as we speak, our country ranks 9th among countries in the world that were most negatively impacted by terrorism based on the Global Terrorism Index released in 2019. Fact is, our present law is weak because we do not have targeted financial sanctions to stop the flow and use of funds or assets of terrorist groups. We have a strategic deficiency in terms of the domestic designation process of terrorist individuals and organizations as provided by the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1373. Hence, the proposed measure intends to address this gap through the provisions laid down by Section 25, entitled Designation of Terrorist Individual, Groups of Persons, Organizations, or Associations. Designation serves as a mechanism to trigger the enforcement of targeted financial sanctions, currently lacking in our present law. This mechanism, made possible only through an order issued by the Anti-Money Laundering Council, not the Anti-Terrorism Council. I repeat, not the Anti-Terrorism Council, could stop the flow and use of funds or assets to terrorist organizations or associations. More so, freezing of assets under the proposed measure is also actually consistent with existing provisions of Section 11, Republic Act 10168, otherwise known as the Terrorism Financing, Prevention, and Suppression Act of 2012. The provision also complies with the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1373, and for the purpose of preventing designated terrorists from accessing their funding by freezing their accounts, so the same cannot be used to carry out a terrorist attack. A designated person is allowed under this measure to question the freeze order by filing the necessary petition with the Court of Appeals. We even added a provision under this bill to allow partial withdrawal of frozen assets for humanitarian reasons as well as for reasonable family needs and sustenance of the designated person. Justice Carpio has many times referred to this provision by saying, and I quote, "Once so designated, the individual can now be arrested upon order of the ATC because the individual is engaged in terrorism. This is plain and simple wrong. Arrests, same with designation or same with detention, are not the intended consequences of designation. As I explained earlier, designation is purely an executive and administrative process intended to trigger the issuance of a freeze order of properties and assets of designated terrorist individuals or terrorist organizations or associations. I do not simply understand where the Honorable Magistrate based his arguments, considering that not a single mention of the word arrest is found under Section 25 of the bill. Justice Carpio must have confused designation with proscription of terrorist groups, organizations, or associations. Designation is administrative and not criminal in nature. To effect an arrest, a designated terrorist group or organization must first be proscribed. Proscription under Section 26 requires court intervention, where a full-blown hearing will take place before an organization may be considered a terrorist organization. It may be done only upon an application filed by the Department of Justice before the Court of Appeals with due notice and opportunity to be heard, given the suspected terrorist groups or organizations or associations. Even membership in a proscribed terrorist organization goes through the same due process of law, where the burden is on the Department of Justice to prove. Last, but definitely not the least, the Rotarian way of life compels us to examine the things that we think, say, or do based on a prevailing question, that is, will it be beneficial to all concerned? My fellow Rotarians, let me emphasize, terrorism knows no timing nor borders. Terrorism in all forms and manifestations constitutes one of the most serious threats to any nation's peace and security. It sows fear and violence so broad and indiscriminate that everyone, literally you and me, could fall prey to these heinous acts of terror. Over and over, we have heard critics saying that the Anti-Terrorism Bill is a threat to legitimate political dissent and freedom of speech. Please do not fall for this misconception. Let me show you that in defining terrorism, in the proposed Anti-Terrorism Bill, we included a proviso under Section 4 to guarantee the constitutionally protected rights to free speech, or right to free speech. It reads, and I quote, "Terrorism as defined in this section shall not include advocacy, protest, dissent, stoppage of work, industrial or mass action, and other similar exercises of civil and political rights, which are not intended to cause death or serious physical harm to a person, to endanger a person's life, or to create a serious risk to public safety," unquote. In all our discourses, in understanding the definition of terrorism, we should bear in mind that act plus purpose should be the guiding principle. We should bear in mind that terrorism refers to both the commission of any of the terrorist acts in order to fulfill any of the purposes mentioned under the bill. Paulit-ulit kong sasabihin sa mga nagbibingi-bingihan na ang terrorism bill ay para labanan ang mga terorista, hindi ang mga nagpoprotesta. This proposed measure is meant not only to be beneficial for anyone else but the Filipino citizenry. It is a dismay that when misconceptions erode the very value of our public discourse, many jump into the wagon and lose sight of logic and reason. Just to illustrate, non-activist and lawyer Nery Colmenares said at a June 12 rally that the Abu Sayyaf would continue killing regardless of whether there is an anti-terrorism bill in place. Terrorists may think that way, but it remains the duty of the state to protect the people from such threat. And wouldn't we be remiss in our duty as legislators and public servants if we would just sit and wait until the next bombing or senseless beheading takes place? If there is one thing that I truly admire about the Rotarians, it must be every member's unyielding commitment to the club's philosophical cornerstone, service above self. Amidst the myriad of issues on anti-terrorism bill, we have to keep in mind the principles of Rotarians' conflict transformation, that is empathy, truth, accountability, and fellowship. And as active members of the society, let us be more discerning on our national issues and be drivers of meaningful laws for the best interests of the people. Our shared commitment towards the ideal act of service. Now more than ever, there remains the challenge before us to stand up for what we know passes Rotary's ethical guide in achieving beneficial, sustainable, and scalable outcomes. History will speak of how you have decided for the interest of our people. Let it be a transformational turn to speak clearly and resoundingly against terrorism. The Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020, as a proposed law, has one clear message. To terrorists who commit crimes against the Filipino people, against humanity, and against the law of nations, our policy will be one that is swift, effective, and constitutional. Again, I wish to thank the Rotary Club of Manila for this opportunity. Mabuhay po tayong lahat.
Thank you very much, Senator Lacson. Are you okay, sir, for some questions from the floor?
Yes, I'm okay to answer questions.
Okay, the first question will now come from past President Jimmy Policarpio. Jimmy, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Senator Ping. This is Jimmy Policarpio.
Good afternoon. Yeah, good to see you.
Anyway, Senator, I know the best person that could explain the anti-terrorism bill is the principal author of the issue. Unfortunately, it seems that the government is a failure in communicating the pros of this anti-terrorism bill. And this can be attested by the various negative responses that are coming out in the print media. Just like today, I don't know what business the UN rapporteur, Philippine-based UN rapporteur, have to make a statement asking the president not to sign. He's not a resident of this country. He's not a Filipino. And our country has been under the threat of communism, under the threat of the NPA. Even in our place in Mindanao, in Lanao, a lot of NPAs are there. And it's about time that this more than 50 years of conflict be put to rest. And I think, personally, this anti-terrorism will come into not stop. So thank you so much, Mr. Senator Ping, for honoring our invitation as chairman of the program committee. Maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat, Jimmy. By the way, ako yung principal sponsor, but I'm only one of the authors. There are so many authors of this bill, of this measure. This is principally authored by no less than the Senate President, Senator Tito Soto, co-authored by Senator De La Rosa, Senator Aimee, and many others. No, by way of a response to the comment made by the UN rapporteur, in human rights, I don't even think he read the provisions of the proposed measure. This is compliant precisely with the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1373. In fact, yung guidelines yung standard set by the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1373, yun ang sinunod namin dito, yun ang parameters. No? Beyond that, the Anti-Terrorism Council cannot act on any request or any request for designating a terrorist organization. So, United Nations against United Nations. I think the United Nations Security Council members have read the provisions of this bill because sila yun ang ulit sa amin dito. Unfortunately, and I can safely assume that the one voicing his opinion against this measure, I doubt if he has read the provisions under the measure. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. We have a question. Dean, I'll call on you after. No, Lance, go ahead with your question, please, and then we will call on Amading Valdez.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator, for a really great and comprehensive explanation of this bill. As a foreigner here now, only 11 years, I'm still totally fascinated by Filipino politics and the various acts, and the questions are great. Yesterday, you were quoted in reminding, well, I guess the administration that the mere fact that an individual in a position of some authority, the mere fact that they may be very wealthy doesn't really mean that they are immune to corruption. I admire your long history of fighting corruption here. Yeah, and I just wondered if there's any link between the corruption and, in particular, the money laundering and the flow of funds into the country to fund terrorism. Is there any link there potentially between this corruption and this bill? Is that part of why this is there?
The reason why we amended the provisions of Republic Act 10168, otherwise known as the Terrorism Financing Prevention and Suppression Act of 2012, is because it has not been effective. No? While it has served as an amendment to the Human Security Act, but there's no mechanism to trigger the designation of terrorist groups, associations, and organizations. Now, if you ask me if there's a link between corruption and the terrorist financing or violations of the anti-money laundering law with reference to terrorism, then there could be some link. But having said that, there is a weakness or a gap in the in Republic Act 10168 to make it more effective in preventing the flow of funds from the usual, financiers of terrorist groups operating in the country. To cite an example, the Marawi siege could have been preempted by authorities because there was no lack of intelligence or failure of intelligence insofar as the Marawi siege is concerned. But, the flow of funds was almost unstoppable because the authorities could not act on the flow of such funds to finance the Maute group in coordination with ISIS because there's something lacking in the law, and that's also one of the purposes why we included in our amendments the provisions of Republic Act 10168 or the Terrorist Financing Prevention and Suppression Act of 2012 by providing such mechanism to preempt or prevent the flow of funds to assist the terrorists, either homegrown or with links with some terrorist organizations in other parts of the world.
Further on that point, Senator, do you think that some of the opposition to this bill could come from those who may benefit through corruption and this flow of funds? Is that part of it, or is this conspiracy stuff?
You may have, hit the nail on the head because one pending petition for proscription is against the CPP-NPA. By the way, the United States Department of Justice has already designated the CPP-NPA as a proscribed or an illegal terrorist organization way back in 2002. Now, in the Philippines, there is a pending trial going on for the prescription of the CPP-NPA. And if you may have noticed, some legal fronts, I won't identify them anymore, but they're the ones very vocal in disseminating false information against the passage of this bill. Well, we can more or less have a similar or the same conclusion why they are so vocal.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Lance. Okay, may we now call on Dean Amading Valdez for the next question. Dean, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Senator. Thank you for that very enlightening presentation, and I have always supported this bill. My only concern is in the implementation, because we rely on foreign intelligence sources, considering that terrorism is always international in its nature. My fear is a scenario where a foreign government may be setting up our own public officials as terrorists. This is most likely considering that some foreign governments have been interfering with our elections and to paralyze the chances of one politician, one government official, for example, may be set up as a terrorist. How shall we deal with that? Because it's very chilling that this could be a double-edged sword, and it could be used against us rather than the real terrorists.
Let me disabuse your mind, Dean Valdez, because designation by a foreign jurisdiction or even a supranational jurisdiction is not binding on the Anti-Terrorism Council to designate such organization as a terrorist organization. We're only bound by the guidelines or standards set by the United Nations, particularly United Nations Security Council Resolution 1373. So there are three instances where an organization, association, or groups of individuals may be designated as a terrorist organization. It is, by way of designation by the United Nations Security Council, because we're bound by the guidelines set by the United Nations. Second, if the designation made by supranational organization or a foreign jurisdiction is in compliance or adheres to the guidelines set by the United Nations, then the ATC may designate such organization or association as a terrorist organization. But let me be clear on that. Once designated, it is only an executive authority to designate. The authority remains with the Anti-Money Laundering Council to freeze the assets and accounts of the suspected or designated terrorist groups or organizations. The Anti-Terrorism Council on its own cannot. Now, that could also pave the way for the ATC to file an ex parte petition with the Court of Appeals through the DOJ, not necessarily the Anti-Terrorism Council, for prescription. And prescription necessitates court intervention. Merong due notice of hearing and so forth and so on. May full-blown na hearing ito. Just what is actually happening now and what happened with the Abu Sayyaf group. Because in 2015, the Abu Sayyaf group was proscribed as a terrorist organization but by a Basilan RTC. Under this bill, we elevated the level of authority to the Court of Appeals. And the Supreme Court will designate or authorize a division of the Court of Appeals to handle prescription cases filed by the Department of Justice. And the burden of proof is on the Department of Justice. It is also the same on the membership. No? Once proscribed, the members, the alleged members of that proscribed terrorist organization will have to go through the same due process of law. Hindi po ito automatic na tinuro ng kapitbahay na NPA ito, assuming that na proscribe yung CPP-NPA, automatic aresto na yung tao. No. Each and every individual member will have to go through the same due process of law that has been done on proscription cases.
So which brings me to this second question, which could be related, Mr. Senator, because we have the Visiting Forces Agreement, and when we pursue international terrorists in this country, that visa agreement may justify or allow the operation of foreign military forces to assist us. So how shall we enforce that, considering that we have to maintain also our sovereign integrity, and it could be compromised with the foreign force that will be operating with us, considering that they have more firepower, more superior, effective firepower to make arrests of these terrorist elements in this country.
Well, regarding VFA or SOPA, no, because we also have a similar treaty with Australia, yung SOPA, they can only provide intelligence support, no, or assistance to our troops. Now, it is different when acting on the intelligence report submitted by such foreign forces, military forces, to our law enforcement agencies or our military personnel, if it is compliant with the provisions of warrantless arrest, then, of course, it is incumbent upon the military personnel or the law enforcement agents to act in accordance with the provisions of Rule 113, Section 5. Kung nasa harap na nila yung nagko-commit at accurate yung information, intelligence information, A1, and they chance upon these terrorist groups about to commit, actually committing, has just committed, then they can make or conduct arrest on the basis of lawful warrantless arrest. Now, if the a foreign country, a foreign jurisdiction, will just provide information or even evidence to convince the Anti-Terrorism Council to designate, as I mentioned earlier, it's not binding. But if it's compliant with the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1373, I mean the parameters or the guidelines set, the standards, then the ATC can now designate such association or organization as a terrorist organization. But designation, again, I would like to belabor the point as to counter the assertion of Justice Carpio na pagka-designated na, the members can already be arrested. No, designation is different. It is just to trigger a request addressed to the Anti-Money Laundering Council to freeze the account. And there's a process. No, it's not as easy as just freezing the account or assets. And the suspected terrorist organization can file a petition with the Court of Appeals to question the freeze order issued by the Anti-Money Laundering Council, not the Anti-Terrorism Council.
Just to the point, because a foreign U.S. Navy SEALs, for example, would be trying to capture an international terrorist in Mindanao with the Filipino citizen around. It will be collateral damage. And the U.S. Navy SEAL can just come and go. So are there provisions where we could define the government-to-government protocols in case a Filipino would be involved in implementing this law, Mr. Senator? Or do you think this is an opportunity for us to bring in amendments that will envision this kind of situation?
First, let me emphasize that the foreign assistance is limited to, intelligence support, whether it's human intelligence or technical or electronic intelligence. Because just like in the case of Marwan, yung sa Mama Sapano, and even yung Marawi, our local military forces relied heavily on the technical support, intelligence, technical intelligence provided by our counterparts. But they're limited to such assistance. They cannot go hand in hand in hunting down or even operating physically against the suspected terrorists. And again, I'd like to emphasize that our local forces, military and police, should abide by the provisions of Rule 113, Section 5 on warrantless arrest. I keep on repeating that because ito yung naging bone of contention and ito yung naging subject of so many disinformation, that we are amending the revised rules of court in this regard. You and I know, Dean Valdez, we cannot do that. Congress cannot do that. It is incumbent upon the Supreme Court to amend or revise the rules of court. Ang pwede namin i-amend yung reglementary period of 36 hours or in the case of the Human Security Act, 3 days. Pwede namin i-amend because that's so provided under the revised penal code, which is a general law. And Congress is not prohibited from amending a general law, which is, like the revised penal code. So ito yung sinasabi na unconstitutional.
Thank you very much, Senator, for the enlightening insights. We just brought out some blind spots which may perhaps help you in further improving this law. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then I think that will come in handy in the IRR. Marirefine yung mga concerns nyo about the participation of foreign military forces and so forth and so on. I don't think we need to amend this bill once approved into law, once enacted into law. But it can be refined in the crafting of the IRR. Thank you.
I agree, Mr. Senator.
Okay, salamat din for that question. And now we will take a question from past District Governor Obet Pagdanganan.
Well, thank you very much, Chito. Good afternoon, Senator Ping, and thank you very much for accepting the invitation.
Good to see you.
And explaining so very well the very important said provisions of the bill, particularly the matter about designation and prescription, sections 25 and 26, respectively. And then also the aspect about the bill not being against demonstrators or advocacy groups, but against terrorists. These are the two main points that I think are being used by many oppositors to the bill. Now, the question is the government doing something, or shouldn't we write a letter officially and formally to, like the UN Commission on Human Rights, which is even threatening the president from signing the bill into law, and other groups like Legal Justice and the different groups who are claiming otherwise, so that they'll be formally informed about the provisions of the bill? And if so, what can be done to improve the dissemination of information? Because mas aktibo yung kabila eh. I hope something can be done so people will really understand, Senator Ping. You're matatag class, very proud of you. Thank you.
That's the initial problem that we encountered because the noise was so loud, and compelling na nalunod kami doon sa mga propaganda. And I would like to thank the Rotary Club of Manila for giving me this opportunity because, I have guested in a webinar hosted by the Management Association of the Philippines. I wrote a letter, as I mentioned in my speech, addressed to Attorney Cayosa, the IBP, explaining to him, trying to enlighten him na yung concept nila, yung understanding nila doon sa proposed measure, mali. But, as I mentioned also, again, as I mentioned in my speech, he remains adamant. If you close your mind and refuse to listen to reason, then nothing much can be done.
But at least formally,
Justice Carpio Justice Carpio in his column this morning, I'm enlightened when I read his column this morning or yesterday. I don't know when it was written. But he's no longer questioning the constitutionality. he shifted his concerns doon sa 14-day reglementary period. He said, there's no more need to extend the reglementary period of, sabi niya, ibalik pa sa 36 hours kasi sa Human Security Act, naging 3 days na yon. Ibalik na lang sa 36 hours. Anyway, pagka warrantless arrest yung naging basis ng pag-aresto, sinasabi niya na hindi na magagranta ng bail. Sigurado madidina yung bail ng suspected terrorist because of the circumstances under the warrantless arrest, like about to commit, actually committing, tapos he just committed, probable cause, based on personal knowledge. But we're looking beyond that. No? Kung ganun ang panuntunan lang, denial ng bail lang ang target o yung achieve, yung desired purpose, paano yung conviction? And the law enforcement agencies or agents need more time to develop or build up an airtight case, sabihin na natin, against the terrorists. And we must remember that very complex and complicated yung terrorism. Maraming cells ito eh. Hindi lang naman ito isang nahuli mo si Juan de la Cruz, tapos ka na eh. How about those preparing, no? Engage in preparatory acts or proposal to commit terrorism? You have to develop your evidence, to strengthen your evidence in order to really file a very strong case. Sayang naman yung pagod kung intelligence and all the surveillance and everything, tapos madidismiss yung kaso. We're not only after bail denial, we're after conviction to its final or logical conclusion.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Ping. Thank you.
Thank you, Gov. Obet.
Thank you, Gov. Obet. Now we call on Joey Uwico, who has another question. Go ahead, Joey. Please unmute yourself. Joey Uwico. Joey, going. Gone. Okay, let's take the question. Next question now from Frank Evaristo. Go ahead, Frank. Please unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, Senator Lacson.
Hi, Frank. Good afternoon.
Yes, Senator. Ang question ko, Senator, is another topic of the day, yung nagbarilan ho sa Sulu about the military and the police. Ano hong take nyo dito? Because according to reports, they were going to some intelligence bombers, suspected bombers who are terrorists. Ano hong tunay, ano tingin nyo yung take nyo nangyari ho?
Well, it's unfortunate and tragic, but the NBI has already initiated its investigation, and it's good that both the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines and the Chief PNP have agreed to let the NBI conduct the investigation. Ang take ko lang dito is, I think this is not the time for divisiveness, between the armed forces, our security forces. But they should also be decisive in first ferreting out the truth behind the slaying or the killing of unfortunately dalawa yung officers yung dalawa non-commissioned officers. And we should not stop at the investigation. We should really see the logical conclusion of the police officers involved if they really murdered mercilessly the army officers and soldiers. Now, ang ano lang dito, wag sanang magkaroon ng wedge, because this will be exploited by those who will benefit, terrorists, armed insurgents. So dapat medyo, this is not the time for emotions to run high, to put it more clearly. And just wait for the investigation. Anyway, the PNP has already acted expeditiously by disarming and even relieving the Chief of Police of Jolo in Sulu.
Thank you, Senator.
Okay, thank you, Frank, for that. Thank you, Frank. May we now call on immediate past President Jackie Rodriguez for the next question. Jackie, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Senator. That was very clear, and it explained to me exactly what I was hoping that bill meant. Senator, terrorists have a big advantage over the forces that are meant to defend our republic, our women, our children, our families. And they can choose the grounds, they can choose the weapons, the time, and the area when they can do damage, where they can burn, they can bomb, they can kill, or do anything. I believe, and correct me please if I'm wrong, that this bill would bring us one step closer to that tremendous advantage they have over the military. It brings us to probably as close to being prepared, as Obed would say, be prepared, Obed being the head of the Boy Scouts. That will probably have a good effect in stopping many terrorist attacks. If that law stops 1, 2, or 10 attacks, then it's done its job for the country. But without that law, we are one step backwards, where terrorists will have that huge advantage over the military. I think, if my assumption is correct, that bill should be sent to every single possible venue, to schools, to colleges, to civic clubs, and explained in the very same way you have so clearly and eloquently explained it. I thank you, sir, for the time you've taken to be with us today and explain so clearly the elements of that bill, and I hope it is signed into law. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jackie. I echo that, actually. We will now call on Dr. Martin Henkelman. Dr. Martin, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Senator. Thank you very much for the explanation for this very important and very interesting law. And I must admit that as a lawyer, when I follow your explanation and interpretation and putting this in the context of jurisdiction, it's very interesting and tempting to look much more into these details. And I totally understand the challenge and to get the balance between the different interests involved in such a law. And on the other side, also the big challenge as the lawmakers always have to have rules and texts that have to be finally applied by other people, by judges and by the police and the security forces. May I benefit from the situation that you're such an important key player for so many laws in the Senate to quickly touch upon a topic which is also very important for many Filipinos, and is also linked to a certain degree to the question of terrorism, because we know that poverty is a breeding ground for terrorism. And I would wonder what you could share with us regarding the development for the very important laws like Arise, Cures, and Create.
I didn't get the question, sorry.
Please rephrase the question.
You are right. We're still in the process of reviewing the proposed measure sent by the Executive Department. And we will go through the same legislative process that we followed when we passed or enacted Bayanihan 1. The Arise, on its face, could be a good approach to providing the stimulus that our business enterprises, the industries, need at this point in time. And the initial reading of the some provisions would suggest that only industries affected by the pandemic should benefit from the support, financial support or stimulus package being proposed by the executive branch. But we have not finished. My staff, they are currently reviewing all the provisions, and it will go through the same legislative process that we follow. Anyway, we'll update you accordingly, once we have a good grasp of the different provisions of the proposed measure.
Okay. Okay, Martin? Okay. Senator, before the next question comes in, and I don't see anybody raising their hand. I think linked to that, the apprehension, Senator, is that to the man on the street, there is this fear that the implementation of this new law may be abused. All right. I think we're all aware that there has been some very strong sentiments about how this anti-drug war has been going on. So that is the fear of the people. I think it's very important, as was suggested earlier, Senator, that a very thorough, comprehensive educational campaign about what the real provisions are of this law. And in fact, addressing the very concerns that have been raised by experts like Justice Carpio and all the critics of it, hitting them point by point, as you have, again, so eloquently presented to this group. Critical po yun kasi until and unless it's addressed, you'll really have resistance. And I, for one, sir, I'm a convert, all right? I used to be very, very worried about this particular bill. But now that you've explained it so well, otra cosa po yan, ano yan. And now it seems like it makes a lot of sense.
I have a question.
This bill is replete with so many safeguards,
Yes.
In the Dangerous Drugs Act, or even in ordinary legislation or laws, hindi nyo makikita yung the arresting officer should immediately inform in writing the judge of the nearest court where the arrest took place. It is only under this measure na kasama yon. And we even extended the written notification to include the Commission on Human Rights. So once a person is arrested by way of a, arrested in accordance with the lawful warrantless arrest, they will have to inform in writing the judge, copy furnished ATC, and then the Commission on Human Rights. So the CHR can already send the representative to inspect, to investigate, to get hold of the records, and guard against possible torture or illegal conduct of investigation, not present in any other measure.
Kaya nga po,
so,
I think
and the penalty is, 10 years imprisonment, just the mere failure to report in writing. The policeman who arrested a terrorist suspect can already be, dismissed from the service and go to prison for 10 years. Just a mere act of not complying with the technical surveillance, wherein a judicial authorization coming from the Court of Appeals is needed. Once an illegal wiretap of a suspected terrorist is committed by any police officer, then he goes to prison. Because I don't think it will take a long investigation and trial to prove that he really violated the provisions of this law. Because it's a simple act of notifying in writing the judge, or a simple act of filing an ex parte application to conduct technical and electronic surveillance. So ang dami pong safeguards dito, and I spoke before the PNP in their latest or recent command conference, and I precisely made them aware. Ito yung mga repercussions if you make simple violations dito sa provisions of the Terrorism Bill, as it is awaiting, of course, the signature of the President.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Again, I think it's very important to be able to make the citizenry understand the provisions that you have for this law, because again, I am a convert. I'm a convert, Senator, and thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, for explaining. And much appreciated, Po.
Thank you, Paul. We have a question from Henning Karcher. Go ahead, Henning.
Yes, I have a question related to the root causes of terrorism in the Philippines, the local root causes and the strategy to address them. International experience shows that fundamentalist Islamistic organizations like the Islamic State, for example, pursue a strategy to win the hearts and minds of the local population, in particular the young people. And they were quite successful in the case of Marawi, it seems. So my question is, in your assessment, Senator, is this the case also here? How successful is such a strategy? And most importantly, is the government doing enough to counter such a strategy? And if not, would you see a chance from your perspective as Senator to support adequate measures, including resourcing for such a counter strategy?
Thank you. One of the major efforts of government is to pass this measure into law, because this will strengthen, this will give our law enforcement agents the necessary legal tool or weapon to address terrorism. The Human Security Act, passed in 2007, is a dead letter law for so many reasons. One, since its passage in 2007, there's only been one conviction. This took place in I think 2017. No? Why? Because one feature or one of the constraints under the Human Security Act is you have to prove first the predicate crime. Say if it's rebellion, you still have to prove the crime of rebellion beyond reasonable doubt before you can prove or find a terrorist guilty of the violation of Human Security Act. Now, as a consequence, and also the provision on the 500,000 pesos fine per day of detention, our police officers, our military personnel, they shy away from filing cases of violation of the Human Security Act because once acquitted, they would be liable to paying the arrested terrorist in the amount of 500,000 pesos per day of detention. So what happens now under the present law? There are 735 terrorist suspects under detention. We got this from the Bureau of Jail Management and Penology from their records. 735 are undergoing trial, but not one of them is being accused for violation of the Human Security Act. They're either charged with murder, kidnapping. Now, another point, Abu Sayyaf, which is a already proscribed terrorist organization. Now, there were 86 terrorists arrested and tried. Out of the 86, 20 were acquitted, 66 were convicted, but not one of the 66 was convicted for violation of the Human Security Act. They were convicted for kidnapping, murder, etc., etc. Now, we can see how weak the present law is, and government has responded by, working to not just amend but repeal the toothless Human Security Act. But we're confronted with so many obstacles, including all the information campaign that's against this measure. But this is a good law, I assure you, with all the safeguards. And
Chito? Yeah. Hang on, Sam. Senator, your mic, I think, just went off. Wala po yung mic, no, Senator.
Nag-off daw yung mic.
Hindi, it's not.
No, it's not.
Nagbago po yung... parang yung main mic po hindi gumagana.
Okay. But ako naka-unmute ako ngayon.
No, sir.
No, but I think the main microphone is not picking. Pero we can still hear you. Nagbago lang po yung quality. Anyway,
I hope you got my response to the last...
Okay.
No, actually, I had an additional aspect in mind, addressing more the root causes of terrorism in the country. The law, of course, will be very effective in terms of short-term measures to counter threats, but it's also important to keep in mind the long-term strategy. And there I was referring to the long-term strategy of fundamentalism, Islamic organizations to win the hearts and minds of the people, for example, in Mindanao. And my question was whether enough is being done by the government to counter this long-term strategy? And if not, what could be done to enhance it?
The root cause of terrorism?
Yes.
Yeah, there are many, but foremost among the root causes is ideology, misplaced ideology, missing.
May topak.
How can one address it, counter these efforts?
Root causes ang tatanungin.
Internationally. Chito, can I
How
still
to
ask
address the root cause? Yun, the amendments introduced or the new provisions that we introduced, yung preventing and countering violent extremism program. Because right now, what is absent is, since not so many cases, or I would say very seldom that a violation of the Human Security Act is filed before the court of law. So there's no reason for government to intervene in their radicalization program. What happens now is the terrorists who are detained while undergoing trial, whether in Muntinlupa or in the different city jails, they're not isolated. They commingle with other prisoners, other detainees. And what happens is, instead of being de-radicalized, they're the ones radicalizing the other inmates, who, by the way, could be released anytime. And once radicalized, they could be potential terrorists. And that is not present under the Human Security Act. That's why we introduced a provision to prevent and counter violent. There's a program that government must undertake. Thank you.
Okay, before we take the next question, Senator, I know now why your audio is different. Yung pong mic nyo, dapat nakaharap yata sa inyo. I think nalihis po ng konti.
Nasa tabi ko lang eh.
You have to face it towards you. The main has to be facing towards you. Parang nalihis po eh. Iharap nyo po yung...
Maybe. Yeah.
Okay po, better. Okay, there's a question from
maybe
Sam.
I should find my technical people here.
Okay, we have a question from Sam Eldebs. Go ahead, Sam. Last two questions.
Okay. Senator, good afternoon, Senator.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you very much for gracing our meeting. I am the Consul General of Syria. Very interesting. I'm sorry, I'm in somewhere where they are doing some construction. I'm sorry. I'm the Consul General of Syria, also the past director of the Rotary Club of Manila. It happened that many Syrians are traveling to South just because they are married to Filipinas. And then, unfortunately, as soon as they're at the airport, they are getting picked up for anti-terrorism immediately. So we look for those guys, we can't find them. And then after maybe 3 months, 4 months, we receive letters that they are in the camp of Fort Bonifacio, the military camp. We cannot see them, we cannot feed them, we cannot check on them until we send to PMP a letter and get permission. It takes 3 months to 4 months through DFA to get permission. And when we visit them, since I'm the Consul General of Syria, they think I'm gonna poison him by feeding, I will take food for him, and they throw away the food, Senator. And then when the American intelligence, they come in, they bring with them pizza, hamburger, etc. They are allowed to feed them. And this is the racism, as I call it. So please, sir, if you can look into this, I don't want any answer on that, sir. But if possible, please, you can investigate on it. Why the Syrians get held at the airport and get held at any international airport or Philippine airports in the Philippines. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're saying that Philippine authorities or military forces took them into custody, the Syrians?
Correct.
Well,
and the last one, he was caught in Davao with his wife. They live in Davao. It took him 3.5 years to get out from that camp. And until now, I still have one Syrian lady who's still in that camp, and I cannot see her. But the American intelligence, anytime they want to see her, they can. Anytime they want to see that guy, they can. But for us, since they are our citizen, we cannot. And this is what I'm upset about. I wrote to the government, I wrote to DFA, but nothing is happening, unfortunately.
let me check on that, because I'm chairman of the Committee on National Defense and Security, and I think I can ask the leadership of the armed forces or even the PNP. If
Yes,
these
sir. Thank you
things
very much.
have actually happened, then some people should be made accountable. Because
Thank you, sir.
as you have described it, it's clearly illegal arrest. Because as I explained in my speech, there are very clear requirements to effect a warrantless arrest, and our laws are very strict on the matter. So let me check on that, and I will give probably Bobby Joseph or Jackie or Obet or anybody a feedback.
Thank you very much, sir. We know each other very well, and we've met many times. But at any rate, I really thank you very, very much for taking care of that. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Consul.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that pretty much wraps up our open forum. Okay, one last question. Okay, you have a question? Okay, go ahead. You're muted. Nakamute ka. Nakamute ka.
مشكلة يا أخي أي واحد سوري موجود بالجنوب طق بيمسكوه بيحطوه أنتي تيروريزم سو عربي.
Hello. Good afternoon, Senator.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Oh, wala na. Good afternoon. Wala na, Senator.
No, I'm here.
Oh, still there. Still there.
Good afternoon, Senator. This is something that is bothering me, and since the topic is terrorism, it brought to my attention what happened in Marawi. Is the bombing, which I feel it is overkill, that dislocated the whole city, that until now they are not back to their normal lives, loss of livelihood, businesses, etc., can be avoided with this new terror bill, Senator? Because for me, that is one history in our country that should never happen, that a city was brought to ashes. Many lives were lost. And as you know, until now, the city is not back to where it used to be. Can this terror bill, we can avoid such happening in the future, Senator?
Yeah, there are features under the bill that could have preempted or prevented the Marawi siege, as I mentioned earlier. There are preventive measures, like, we are punishing inchoate offenses in the preparation, even training, facilitating. We are making those offenses known as inchoate offense punishable under this law. We don't need to wait for the actual bombing. I mean, by the terrorists, because you mentioned also the bombing conducted by the government forces. Now, your concern
yes.
regarding bringing down or turning Marawi City into ashes, that's a function of rehabilitation. And I think there are already moves to rehabilitate Marawi. Only, I submit that it's taking quite some time before it takes off the ground. And it's unfortunate because, when focus or attention was on the Marawi siege, everybody was, seemed to want to attend to the needs of the people there. But once the issue turned cold, then it seems the government has, somehow not really forgotten but neglected its duty to rehabilitate Marawi. But, it could have been prevented not only because of punishing inchoate offenses as featured or as provided in this measure, but also the flow of funds. Because now we have a mechanism in place effectively amending the Terrorism Financing Prevention and Suppression Act of 2012. Because before, helpless yung ating Anti-Money Laundering Council as well as the Anti-Terrorism Council. Now there is a mechanism that could trigger the stoppage of the flow of funds or access of funds by our local terrorists.
Okay.
In other words, Senator, there was a failure of intelligence because that could have been avoided. So I think that has to be improved as far as intelligence of the military is concerned. So that kind of bombings resulted into unimaginable destructions, human lives, in properties, etc. Can be avoided.
I don't think there was failure of intelligence because, I don't think there was failure of intelligence because during the briefing when they were planning to declare martial law in Mindanao, we had a briefing from the security forces, and they showed us actual videos or video footages of the planning stage, but they could not act on it because under the Human Security Act, there is no feature to prevent preparatory acts, and they could not stop the flow of funds, of money from the ISIS to the local Maute groups. They're helpless because there was no mechanism under the present law now. That's why we're trying to strengthen that to include inchoate offenses and to provide mechanism for the freezing of assets and funds.
Yeah. Okay. I think that answers the question.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that alone, that recap alone puts so much teeth into this law. Senator, personally thanking you for your time and for your enlightenment, done so eloquently. I call now on our President, Bobby Joseph, to thank you on behalf of everybody and bring this meeting
Mr. Senator, thank you so much for a very enlightening Thursday. And you are one of our favorites. Thank you. Mabuhay ka, sir.
Thank you. Yeah. Wala nang virtual plaque. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Salamat, Senator.
Thank you.
Mabuhay po kayo.
Very
God
good.
bless.
Congratulations, Senator Ping.
Thank you.